Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about the 2024 NFL Draft Class of the Washington Commanders based on data. So we're going to look at production, athleticism, and other statistical factors to determine how well the Commanders did in this particular draft class. Now, stay tuned until the end of the video where I reveal the final grade for the Washington Commanders, but there's a couple things we need to get to before we get there. Well, first of all, the needs. So this is the general needs assessment of the Washington Commanders. We're taking a look at the average AV, which is essentially how well these prospects have been performing right now. The data grades are on the right-hand side, which is called EAV, which is kind of what they were coming out of the draft. If you're new to data grades and new to my system of data, you can go back to some of my other grades that I've done on this channel. You could also go to the top 50 prospects video on this channel right before the draft. That'll go into great detail in terms of all the data and all the grades and all that kind of stuff for it in terms of what I do. But all the data grade is it's an aggregation of various production, athleticism, and other statistical factors into one number to determine how well this prospect tested, with numbers that actually correlate to NFL success. Also, there's age. Age deals with how old the prospects are. Typically, prospects that are age 30 and older have a higher chance of phasing out in terms of their NFL career. Their production typically dips. They typically have more injuries. So age is definitely another factor to look at in terms of evaluating the Commanders, and that's why it's on there as well. The needs that I could see so far. So after doing a needs assessment of them, I think the quarterback position obviously is a position of need. Wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, all our needs. Running back as well. Pretty much the whole offense needs some additional help. Then when you get to the defensive side of the football, the edge rusher position also needs assistance. Cornerback especially. There are 31 out of 32 teams in terms of the cornerback depth that they have right now, in terms of how they actually performed and based on the age of the cornerbacks that are starting right now. So that is another area that needs to be addressed on top of linebacker and safety. So the Commanders have a lot of needs. I mean, there's a reason why they were picking so high, but let's see if they address them. So in terms of that, before we get to the final overall examination of the roster, the biggest factors that come into my final grade, I look at the biggest needs. Quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, edge, cornerback, offensive line, safety, running back, linebacker. They got a lot of needs. I don't think they're going to hit all those needs in this particular draft class, but I'm going to look to see, did they meet their needs? Did they fill some roster needs? That's going to be one factor in terms of my final grade. Also, did they draft good prospects? The way I define good prospects from a data perspective is prospects that have a 70 or higher data grade, because 86 to 90% of all long-term starters at various positions typically had an 86 typically had a 70 or higher data grade. So essentially, most starters were in the 70 or higher range. So if somebody's below that, if they have like a 60 percentile score or a 50 percentile or 40 percentile score, there's a very low likelihood of that prospect becoming a long-term starter. At the very least, if they did become a starter, they would become an outlier based on data. So that's one way that I'm going to be evaluating the needs on the roster, is with that data grade. And then, of course, did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? So regardless of where they're drafting, the lower you get in terms of the draft, you really should be targeting guys who have great data grades, because statistically speaking, when prospects have poor data grades, they already have a low chance of becoming successful. But once you throw them into the fifth, the sixth, the seventh round, there's even less of a chance of them becoming successful. So if you want to draft, if you want to hit in the seventh, the sixth, the fifth, the fourth round, all those areas, take prospects that have good data grades, because otherwise you probably are not going to be expecting them to do anything except maybe be special teamers or camp bodies. So that's definitely the concerns there with that. But overall, those are my general factors in terms of my final grade. Let's start with the first pick for the Washington Commanders in terms of Jayden Daniels, quarterback at LSU. His data grade was 83.35 out of 100. His floor is 88. The floor grade is essentially the average floor for a prospect taken at pick 2. And then the balance grade takes a look at takes a look at the ceiling plus the floor. So The ceiling for Daniels is 83 percentile, which takes a look at all of his data. The floor takes a look at prospects that tested like him in that pick range, and then the balance grade kind of marries the ceiling with the floor to a certain extent. And Daniels is one of the first players that, not many players are like this, but his floor is actually higher than his ceiling, which means that he was kind of might have been overdrafted. Again, I'm not trying to like harp too much on that, but based on his overall data, he might have been overdrafted based on his overall statistical data. Now, his pick AV is 99.23, so most prospects picked at pick 2 typically have an average AV of 99.23 out of 100, and his overall pick grade would be a B based on his data grade. Now, looking at his data, he had fantastic mobile quarterback ability. You know, his mobile quarterback score was in the high 90 percentile range, but his passing efficiency data was the only real concern. He had a 98 in terms of his best quarterback score with a 74.63. Biggest things really holding him back was his age. He's a little bit older of a quarterback prospect, and that kind of lowered him a little bit. So I still think Jayden Daniels has a good shot to become a really good quarterback prospect, but he wasn't the best in terms of his overall projection long term. So, in other words, Jayden Daniels is somebody who his upside potential is less than other prospects in this draft. So, a guy like J.J. McCarthy, for example, has better potential. He's not exactly at the same level as sort of as Jayden Daniels in terms of like mobile quarterback ability and stuff like that. But there is that potential with a J.J. McCarthy that's not exactly here with a Jayden Daniels because of age and other factors like that. Then of course we get to pick 36 and Johnny Newton, defensive tackle out of Illinois. His data grade was 95.85. His floor is 79. His balance grade is 87. Overall pick AV here is 94.21. Overall, I would give this pick grade a A. Johnny Newton was tremendously productive, 90 plus percentile in terms of solo tackle, sack, and TFL data. Then you look at his other production traits in terms of forced fumbles, pass deflections, and interception data. He was above average for the defensive tackle position. And then when you look at athleticism traits, we don't really have anything there, but based on his projected 40-yard dash, he was an 89 percentile tester based on his speed score. And then in terms of adjusted production traits, he was in the All-Pro average, Pro Bowl average, and starter average of the position. So this was a very good selection for the Washington Commanders. The fact that they were able to get a quarterback that has the potential to be very good, along with a really almost transformational defensive tackle, if he's healthy, he could. I mean, this was a guy who I identified as a first round defensive tackle, and you're getting him in the second round because of injury. And if he is healthy, this could be a tremendous pick for them. It could really pay a lot of dividends for them in the interior defensive line position. Then, of course, we get to pick 36 in Mike, cornerback out of Michigan. His data grade was 67.05. His floor is 65 percentile. His balance grade is 87. And pick AV is 94.21. Overall pick grade for this would be a D. Taking a look at his market share production, he had a 70.33 solo tackle score, 80 percentile in terms of interceptions, and 48 percentile in terms of pass deflection data. So his pass deflection data was below average. Taking a look at his athleticism traits, he had 87 percentile in terms of explosiveness, with 72 percentile in terms of flexibility or change of direction skills, with a above average speed, but not really near elite or elite speed for his size. And then adjusted production wise, the biggest concern with Mike out of Michigan is that his age score is so low. You know, he's a 10 percentile age prospect based on his data. His pass score is 80 percentile, which is not bad. So there is a chance he could become a long-term starter, but a lot of times cornerbacks that are really old don't translate as well. So again, that's why his score is the way it is. He does have good production. He does have good athleticism, but his age kind of takes him out of high quality outcomes, which would make him have a higher bust potential compared to other prospects. Then, of course, we get to pick 53 and Ben Sinnott, tight end out of Kansas State. His data grade is 97.13. His floor is 48. His balance grade is 72 with a pick AV of 78.76. Overall pick grade for this, I would give them an A. Taking a look at his production traits, tremendous production, near elite receiving market share, total offensive market share, and above average touchdown data. When you look at his efficiency scores, really good yards per reception, really good touchdowns per touch, and then athletically speaking, 98 percentile in terms of explosiveness, 95 percentile in terms of his change of direction skills athletically, and then doesn't have near elite speed, but does have above average speed. So Ben Sinnott is one of those prospects that has a great production profile, good athleticism traits, and when you look at adjusted production, he hits all the numbers that you're looking for at the position. So he has about as much upside as Brock Bowers to a certain extent because of his overall data, and I am excited to see him end up on the Washington Commanders, who definitely need some more players to throw the football to in many ways. Then, of course, you get to pick 67 and Brandon Coleman, offensive guard out of TCU. His data grade is 97.93, his floor is 84.42, and balance grade is 91.18. His pick AV is 71.43. Overall pick grade for this, I'd give him an A. Taking a look at his athleticism traits, he had a 98.13 explosion score of a 94.98 speed score for his size. So when you look at the All-Pro averages and the Pro Bowl averages and the starter averages, he hits within all those averages at the position for them. Then, of course, you get to pick 100 in terms of Luke McCaffrey, wide receiver out of Rice. His data grade was 73.73 out of 100. His projected floor is 53.74. His balance grade is 63. And his pick AV is 69.50 with an overall grade of a C. Taking a look at his production traits, he had good total offensive market share and TD market share for the position. In terms of efficiency, he had really good TD percentage, but not so much in terms of yards per reception. And then in terms of athletically speaking, he had a 92 percentile change of direction, athleticism score with above average speed. Luke McCaffrey has an interesting profile, good production, good athleticism traits. When you look at his adjusted production, though, he's not the best in terms of his age and his MSA rating, again, taking into account his market share production overall. But I do think he does have a chance to become a starter average long term, and he does have good athleticism traits. So this might be a sneaky good wide receiver prospect for them who might become a starter. Then, of course, we get to pick 139 and Jordan McGee, linebacker out of Temple. His data grade is 73.40 out of 100. His floor is 47.37. Balance grade is 60. And pick AV is 32.43. Overall pick grade would be a C. Taking a look at his production traits, he had a really good TFL market share, a really good sack market share, but below average solo tackle data. When you look at his other market share traits, he had really good pass deflection data, so he might be a good coverage linebacker in a lot of ways. And then when you look at his athleticism traits, he had an 83 percentile speed score, 67 percentile in terms of explosiveness, and then adjusted production wise, it wasn't quite near the starter averages. So based on his production for his age and his level of competition, it wasn't exactly where you wanted it to be, but he could end up becoming a successful linebacker because of his athleticism traits. So I am interested to see what happens with him, but he was one of their not as good testing prospects long term. Then, of course, we get to pick 161 and Dominique Hampton, safety out of Washington. His data grade was 90.95. His floor is 47.37. His balance grade is 75.55. And pick AV is 31.27. Overall pick grade I would give them is a A. Taking a look at his production traits, he had an 81 percentile solo tackle score, 45 percentile interception score, and 83.12 in terms of pass deflection data. So good all-around production, not the best in terms of interceptions, but did have good pass deflection and solo tackle data. When you look at his athleticism traits, he had really good athleticism, 89 percentile explosiveness, 93 percentile in terms of change of direction skills, and this is just really great athleticism traits. I mean, I don't think it's stressed enough. I don't know why he fell as far as he did, but athletically speaking, he's one of the most athletic safeties in this draft class, and I was very surprised to see that he fell as far as he did. Now, when you get to adjusted production traits, he is a little bit older in terms of his age score, but his pass rating is 90 percentile, and collectively, all this data together, he tested like a very special safety prospect. So he was within my top 10 safeties this year based on overall data projection, and I do think he is an exciting selection for them that might pay dividends long term, especially considering where he was drafted. This might be their best selection out of all their selections this year. Then, of course, we get to pick 222 and Javante Jean-Baptiste, edge out of Notre Dame. His ceiling is 35 percentile, his floor is 25, his balance grade is 30, and pick AV is 8.11 with an overall pick grade of an F. Based on his production traits, he was below average in everything except for tackle for loss data. When you look at his other edge rusher market share, his forced fumble market share, pass deflection market share, all those areas were below average. And then when you look at athleticism traits, he was below average in terms of explosiveness and below average in terms of speed. And then his adjusted production traits are nowhere near the starter averages, the Pro Bowl averages, the All Pro averages. It's safe to say from a statistical standpoint that Javante Jean-Baptiste is probably just going to be a rotational backup type of player. So I do think that there is some positive things here and there, but he just doesn't have a very good profile, which is why they didn't grade so well here. So final grade, I would give the Washington Commanders a B. Did they meet all their roster needs? I would say yes and no. Did they draft good prospects? I would say yes and no. Did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? I would say yes. The Commanders had the eighth best draft class based on talent and value, based on the metrics that I use. But this class has the potential to be the best class from this year due to the metric potential of most of their draft picks. So they took a lot of really good players, a lot of high quality players that, and the sheer number of those players is the biggest thing, in terms of Dominique Hampton and Brandon Coleman and Jayden Daniels and Johnny Newton. Like they took a lot of players that have the potential to be high quality starters for them. So I'm excited to see what happens with them, but that's how I graded on their draft class. Be sure to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/jcoburn if you want to learn more about my grading system, about my other data that's going to be coming soon. Also, please consider checking out my formerly known as Twitter account at Geometrics. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.